Iron John Part 9. This is Chapter 3. It's called The Road of Ashes, Descent and Grief. We've come to a new section of the story now, and we might look back on the boy's progress so far. The king's son, in following the wild man, has not gone the way of delinquency, drug addiction, and self-shaming. On the contrary, he has been lifted up to what is great in him. It is as if his teacher in high school had been Pablo Casals, who taught him what genius is, and by commenting on the gold tip of his finger, convinced him that he had some. He also learned to trust his instinctual body, or hair, and finally he sees eyes looking back at him from the water, and by extension looking at him from the grass, the trees, the mountains. He learned that the whole world is on fire. Everything is intelligent. All of his hair turns gold. Such teaching can have strange effects. If such good luck happened to one of us, a friend would probably warn us that we were in danger of becoming overly grand. These teachings, moreover, got laid on the boy quite young. That is one problem in going to a sacred spring with a wild man. And yet, most of us, even though the lessons may have arrived in a fragmentary form, one bit now and one bit then, scattered through months or years, received a similar teaching. For some, the teaching about eyes arrived in early childhood, when we were amazed by woods and gardens and knew they were alive. The gold hair teaching appeared at 12 or 14, when, fueled by sexual instinct, we rose or fell deeply in love, and knew that it was good, very good. Later, when our teens came, we felt mental or physical abilities in us that we had never even imagined. Each of us had already guessed that we were sons of kings and queens, and somehow had landed mistakenly in our prosaic and dumb family. Our grandiosity then was already in us, even if no visible wild man took us to his magical pond. We know the feeling of grandeur, and we want to have it all the time. In order to keep the grandeur feeling, a child may refuse to remember ugly facts of childhood, may look away from disorganization, abuse, abandonment, lack of protection, and skip over our parents' indifference, addictions, or dark side. Animals apparently don't have to worry so much about inflation, but we are human beings, and a little bit of gold, or genius feeling, can send us into high altitudes from which we don't want to descend. It was Robinson Jeffers who, in speaking of mankind's scientific knowledge and the subsequent grandiosity, said, "A little knowledge, a pebble from the shingle, a drop from the oceans. Who would have dreamed this infinitely little too much?" What happens? Young men, when lifted up, may become white swans, grandiose ascenders, flying boys, just as young women, similarly lifted up, may become flying girls, and both make love with invisible people at high altitude. The Jungian thinkers have done well in noticing and describing this phenomenon, and the phrase puer aeternus, holy or eternal boy, and puella aeterna, holy or eternal girl, are phrases familiar to many. The Jungians have evoked the eternal boy in great detail. Mary Louise von Franz, Puer Aeternus, is the classic book. Mary Louise von Franz, she was a Jungian analyst. Mary Louise von Franz's Puer Aeternis is the classic book. In any case, these flying people, giddily spiritual, do not inhabit their own bodies well, and are open to terrible shocks of abandonment. They are unable to accept limitations, and are averse to a certain boring quality native to human life. Mary Louise von Franz named The Little Prince as the generic story. It was written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who was literally a pilot hero, always longing for pure life on other planets, but whose little prince died when bitten by a snake on this one. Peter Pan belongs among the flyers, as do most ashram habitués, devotes of higher consciousness, determined to avoid earthly food, platonic lovers, and celibates, and some Don Juans who want such heavenly perfection in women that they are obliged to leave each one in whom they fail to find the missing pearl. Grandiose ascenders sometimes dream of rising in an elevator that is attached to the outside of a building, but when they get to the upper floor, they often find themselves with no entrance to the building. The flying man usually likes women, but may shrink a woman to keep her in a bottle so that it can carry her in his pocket. The young Puer Aeternis men are by no means negative. They love spirit and embody much of the spiritual energy in the nation. Their ascensions bring many blessings to the culture. Without them, the American culture would probably thicken and harden into concrete. So the grandiose ascender is a complicated person. Grandiose ascenders, I was, and am a good example, come out of all sorts of families. And sometimes the ascension is taken on as an intelligent survival method. I gave these lines earlier. What does the sun do? He turns away, loses courage, goes outdoors to feed with wild things, live among dens and huts, eats distance and silence. He grows long wings, enters the spiral, ascends. That scene already took place when I was 12 or so. When I was 28, I still had the longing for purity, to be above it all, not to be involved. Mary Louise von Franz concluded from her experience with these heavenly flyers, or flying splinters, that they choose ascent as a revolt against maternal earthliness and female conservatism. They fly upward, she believes, out of fear of the magnets that she says some women hide in the ground in the hope of luring light-headed men down to the ground of marriages, jobs, and long-range commitment. The evolution of the boy into a bird-like creature is a natural movement. He looks up at the light when he wants to escape, as do birds. Imprisoned birds flutter up the wall toward any cracks of light. So the young ascenders often find themselves achieving spirit, but at the expense of life or their own grounding in masculine life. How far he is from working men when he's 40, from all men. I'm not saying that spiritual work in itself is wrong. Not at all. But it's important to consider when in a person's life should take place. We remember that Baal Shem Tov, that genius of the spirit in the early 18th century in Poland, would not let his young men read certain spiritual texts until they were 35. Some say that the man's task in the first half of his life is to become bounded to matter, to learn a craft, become friends with wood, earth, wind, or fire. When Jung established a training center in Zurich, he would not accept a person who was not already a success in some other career. It was a way of saying 35 or older. But we need to add that not all young men are ascenders. Some are earthbound, take on responsibility too early, commit themselves to supporting others. They walk slowly, move close to the ground, carry enormous burdens, feel they have no right to look at silvers of sunlight. Their family tradition is that the sun's grandiosity is to be wiped out early. Sometimes in those families, the women are the inflated ones, and the men are not. Men take the depressed road. They do not become artists or musicians. Their life takes place where the soles of their shoes touch the ground. Some fairy tales call them shoemakers, and note the tension between them and the higher-hearted tailors. The scarcity culture of the European Middle Ages, to name only one scarcity culture, did not allow the young men many possibilities of ascension. Our culture of abundance or entitlement sets very few limitations. And for many college students, the goddess of necessity is almost unknown. The boy in our story is at the moment of satisfaction. The boy in our story is at the moment of ascension now. As such, he is similar, for better or worse, to millions of people in American culture now. We have to look very carefully at these ascenders, these tailors or flyers, if we are going to make any change in men's and women's lives. And we might look at them in the light of three words: passivity, naivety, and numbness. We all know that women's ascension is very intense and widespread, but I think a woman could talk with much more accuracy than I could about its nature, and I think it is appropriate for women to describe it. So we will confine ourselves here to men's ascension. We know that for hundreds of thousands of years, men have admired each other, and been admired by women, in particular for their activity. Men and women alike once called on men to pierce the dangerous places, carry handfuls of courage to the waterfalls, dust the trails of the wild boars. All knew that if men did that well, the women and children could sleep safely. Now the boars have turned to pigs in the stockyard, and the rushing rivers to the waterfall in the Museum of Modern Art courtyard. The activity men were once loved for is not required. Men dared to enter the realm of animals, engage them, fight them, wrestle with the soul of the animal, learn their dances, cross through the veil to them. Some men, called shamans, entered into the realm of the spirits as well, wrestled with them, outwitted them, and saved people who had become ill through the mischievous activities of those spirits. Men have been loved for their astonishing initiative, embarking on wide oceans, starting a farm in rocky country from scratch, imagining a new business, doing it skillfully, working with beginnings, doing what has never been done. Young Viking men sometimes train themselves by walking on the ends of the oars, while the rowers continued rowing. Women, until recent times, have not been praised for their activity. They have been asked for centuries to live in an enforced passivity demanded of them by monks, doctors, philosophers, moralists, theologians, and judges.